Welcome to the new Captains of Industry, where we're interviewing tomorrow's large companies today. Today I've got Louis Ross with us. He's the chairman and CEO of TexCom. Louis, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me, George. Pleasure to be here.
So Louis, tell us, what does TexCom do? Tell us about your company.
Well, our company is a publicly traded company. We post our financials on pink sheets. We have one operating subsidiary company that's in the business of disposing of waste materials generated by the oil and gas industry through exploration and production activities. We have another project under development that's in a similar environmental disposal business, disposing of industrial wastewater, but permits are still pending for that, and that's not an operational company yet. The operational company that's disposing of waste from oil and gas, it's been in operation now for 12 years, and it's consistently profitable and regularly growing revenues.
Well, I was pretty interested in your business from a perspective of, I didn't understand the waste business from oil drilling, and I didn't understand it. Tell us a little bit about what waste is coming from drilling products and in oil and gas pipes.
Okay. Well, traditionally, George, there is several types of waste materials that are generated by the industry, and those people who are in it are familiar with that. When a well is being drilled, when the well bore is being drilled, the materials coming out of that is known as drilling waste, or the EPA refers to it as non-hazardous oil field waste. That consists of the rock tailings that the drill bit is chewing up, plus drilling muds that are used to carry the rock tailings to the surface, and of course salt water. That's a mixture of solids and salt water. Once a well is completed and it's put in operation, every oil and gas well produces water that comes from the same formations underground. As a well ages or matures, the amount of water that it produces increases as the amount of hydrocarbon decreases. That's known in the business as produced water. Those two types of waste materials are traditional. There are a lot of people in that business, including the drilling and exploration companies themselves. But there are some newer needs for waste disposal that have come up more recently in the business. And the two that we're now focusing on to serve as a platform for growth are naturally occurring radioactive material. The acronym is NROM, and it's known in the business as NORM. Most people aren't aware that the oil and gas industry generates that type of material. But it's naturally occurring. It's radium that's present in the minerals that are in the formation where the oil and gas and the salt water are being produced.
Now, historically, what has been done with this norm?
Very little, and that's what's so interesting about this. The material itself scales out on piping that's in the well. It scales out on all the surface equipment, the piping, the storage tanks and the tank batteries, pumps, and everything else. It just precipitates out as hard water scale. But in this instance, radium is contained in that. So there's measurable amounts of radioactivity in the material. It's not hazardous as long as it stays in place, inside piping, inside tanks, because the type of radiation is not very penetrating through air or materials. But it does present a problem once those materials are cleaned out. If it is dried out and it is in the form of airborne particles and can be inhaled, or if that material leaches into groundwater, for example, and gets into drinking water, then it can be ingested. In neither of those cases, it becomes hazardous to human health and welfare.
So let me ask you, if you're looking at some event or legal event or a lawsuit or a new government regulation, what has caused this norm to now be paid attention to after 60, 70, 80, maybe 100 years of not being a paid attention to?
Very relevant question, and it's the perfect question. Because over the years, to answer to your first question, what's been done with it? Most operators just allow that scale to stay in stacks of pipe or old tanks. They let a sleeping dog lie. They just leave it alone. And hence there's a very large amount of that scale material, that norm material, that's in used equipment around the country in the old oil fields. What's happened more recently to increase industry awareness and to some degree now public awareness is a few instances. And the most notable of that is a lawsuit that took place in the state of Louisiana from a facility that cleaned this scale from the inside of piping or tubing that was drawn out of older oil wells. Most of that tubing was owned by Exxon. The company and the facility that was removing the norm from the equipment spilled a lot of it on the ground, and the local folks became aware of it, local authorities as well. There was a suit filed against Exxon in about 2003, 2004, and the initial judgment against Exxon was $1.2 billion. Now, they've appealed that several times, and it finally has settled for $168 million. But the entire industry is now acutely aware of the fact that the public has learned that such material exists and is out there. That's only the first and most notable of these instances, George. There are now some 40 or more lawsuits around the country.
So that $1 billion is what really woke the industry up, that this is a problem.
Yes.
And then that put your company from sort of being on the back burner to being on the front burner as an industry solution.
In a way, we were not distinguished from most companies in terms of disposing the earlier types of waste I described, produced water and drilling waste. We were one of many companies that does that. But what makes us different, what differentiates us from our competition, has to do with the geology where we're located. We're able to inject slurried solids and liquids underground, whereas most people can't do that. They can only inject water. Because we can inject solids, slurried in water, we can dispose of this scale norm that's taken out of the equipment. We are one of only a handful of companies that are permitted in the United States to dispose of that material by injecting it underground through wells. Elsewhere in the country, if that material is collected by removing it from piping or from tanks, it's generally disposed of in a landfill, and that's not a good option because it's known to leak over time. And there's always sources of underground drinking water and aquifers underneath the landfills, so not a good option. We're only one of four companies in the country that has permits to inject norm underground through wells.
So you're on the front end of a new industry.
Mm-hmm.
You're one of only four companies that's doing it. You're one of only there's only two companies that are public that are doing it.
Of those four, yes, we and
another
one other.
company.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a very large business. Right?
It is. We're relying on a study that was done by Argonne Laboratory, as you know, part of the Federal Nuclear Agency. They estimated in the late 90s there were over 10 million barrels of this norm material encased in various oil field equipment. It's all out there in the oil fields. At the estimated cost to dispose of that material, they value that market at over $3.5 billion. We estimate today, based on 2010 statistics, there's probably close to $5 or even $5.5 billion in the total cost to dismantle the equipment, remove the norm, and dispose of it in proper permitted sites.
So you're a young entrepreneurial company.
Yep.
You've got a bright future. Mm-hmm. You're doing the right things. You're growing the company. I want to commend you. You're a perfect company to come on the New Captains of Industry, and I thank you for being on the show.
Thank you very much, George. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.